Union Cabinet has given its go-ahead to Union Home Minister Amit Shah to introduce the criminal law amendment bills which are set to replace the old pre-colonial criminal legislations. The Prime Minister and his office have disagreed with two suggestions made by the Parliamentary Standing Committee of Home Affairs which have far-reaching consequences and would have been seen as against the Supreme Court and its judgments. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs had recommended the offence of adultery to be retained in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. The Supreme Court had struck it down as unconstitutional in 2018, saying it was discriminatory towards women and perpetuating gender stereotypes and diminishing the dignity of women. The court had held that a wife was treated like a property of the man and only penalized the man, disregarding the autonomy of a woman. The Parliamentary Committee is of the view that the institution of marriage is considered sacred and needs to be safeguarded in Indian society and made gender neutral.
Well, two important points that we must, tell our viewers. One, that the Cabinet gave this clearance on Friday, and over the weekend they have been working to finalize the Home Ministry, the criminal codes, which are basically aimed to undo what is pre-colonial things, the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Indian Penal Code, as well as the Indian Evidence Act. These are the three acts that are being redone. There is a controversy over the name, but the Prime Minister gave his final go-ahead after really going through many of the recommendations that were made by the Parliamentary Committee, Standing Committee on Home Affairs. Two controversial recommendations that they had made, and there were dissent notes to these, of course, apart from many other dissent notes from the opposition. One was on adultery, and on that the Prime Minister as well as the Cabinet felt that women should not be neglected. Women's powers and rights must be respected, and it's in that fitness of thing that they didn't want to go against the Supreme Court judgment, which had made it very clear that you have to recognize both man as well as women, and something which the Standing Committee had said, is the essence of Indian society, the marriage and everything else. But finally it was disagreed upon, and it was a political decision not to accept the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs, where it had made those controversial suggestions in terms of, including adultery as a provision. Having said that, another provision which has been extremely controversial, which led to a 5-judge bench on Section 377 of the old Indian Penal Code. It wasn't there in the original one. The committee decided to include it and say that, where of course there is no consensus, then you should definitely no consensual sex between the same sex, then you should not, you should add other ones. But in this context, the Supreme Court had given its ruling. The Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet discussed this entire matter, and they have agreed to leave it as is, where its basis, without any touching or inclusion. Section 377 had been struck down earlier by the Supreme Court, so those remain. What will, of course, remain a bone of contention for South India and the South Indian MPs is the naming of these bills, and those have been a source of big controversy, which many of them find it extremely difficult to pronounce. But nevertheless, the Cabinet's approval, it's all set to be introduced in Parliament and be taken up for discussion as early as Wednesday in the Lok Sabha, and early next week, if not on Monday next week in the Rajya Sabha, before it becomes a law.